My own son told me I had to prove I was still contributing to the household, the one I paid for. He said it over breakfast, casual, as if he were asking me to pass the salt. "We've been talking," Craig said, and by we, he meant his wife, Tammy. "And we just think maybe it's time to reevaluate everyone's role in the house. You know, see if you're still contributing." I didn't answer. I cut my toast into quarters, even though I wasn't hungry. Tammy, across the table, didn't look up from her phone. She rarely did anymore. I'd lived in this house for 37 years. Bought it with Frank, God rest his soul, when we were still young and foolish enough to think we'd need a second nursery. Raised Craig here, buried Frank here in a way. His ashes were under the oak tree out back, where he used to sit every Sunday with a glass of bourbon and a stupid fishing hat he wore just to make me laugh. Now Craig was 48, recently between jobs, as he called it, and Tammy had moved her real estate business into our living room. I paid the taxes, the insurance, the utilities. Craig's name wasn't on a single bill, but somehow it was me who had to justify her presence. They'd moved back in after Craig's third layoff. Said it would be temporary. That was 6 years ago. "You know, Mum," Craig added, "it's not about the money. It's more about showing that you still want to be part of things, that you can still pull your weight." I looked up. His face had that familiar sheen of guilt buried under self-righteousness. "I see," I said. Then I excused myself and went upstairs to the guest room, my room, where the sheets smelled like dust and lavender, and where my things stayed packed in plastic tubs because Tammy said it looked neater. I sat on the bed and folded my hands. My joints ached, like always. I could hear Tammy downstairs now, laughing into her headset, selling a property I'd probably paid the staging costs for. They never asked. They just used my account, said it was simpler that way. I thought of my granddaughter, Brooke. Sweet girl. Called every week. Came over with flowers and stories from college. The only one who ever asked how I was really doing. The rest of them, Craig, Tammy, their son, Wyatt, they passed me like furniture. Like I was part of the architecture. Necessary, but not considered. That night, after they all went out to dinner without me. "Just a quick bite, Mum. You wouldn't like the place." I opened my old black folder. Inside, the deed, the bank records, the will Frank and I wrote together in '97, updated after his heart attack. The power of attorney, which Craig had suggested I sign in 2018. The automatic transfers I'd set up. Out of love, out of fear, out of habit. It hit me then, the quiet cruelty of it all. Not the yelling kind, not even the overt kind, just the slow, grinding kind, the kind that erases you by degrees. They said I needed to prove I could still contribute, so I would. Starting with a phone call to my lawyer in the morning. I kept the phone call to myself, didn't say a word at breakfast, just poured my coffee, added 2 sugars, and sat in my usual spot by the window, where the sun hit the edge of the counter around 8:20 each morning. Craig and Tammy breezed in 10 minutes later, still in their gym clothes. She reeked of eucalyptus and fake lemon. He wore the same sneakers I'd bought him last Christmas. "Morning, Mum," Craig said, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't told me yesterday to prove my worth. Tammy didn't say a thing. She never did, unless it was about someone being in her way or leaving the thermostat too low. Wyatt clomped down the stairs next, earbuds in, hoodie up, eyes on his phone. 16 years old. I'd once rocked him to sleep during a thunderstorm while Tammy and Craig argued in the driveway. He didn't even glance at me now. I drank my coffee slowly, calmly. I didn't owe them a performance. When they all left, Craig muttering something about errands, Tammy off to a showing, Wyatt disappearing God knows where. I rinsed my cup and walked out to the backyard. The grass was overgrown. Craig said he'd mow it next weekend. It was Thursday. The oak tree stood still in the corner, stubborn and wide. Beneath it, I'd buried Frank's ashes, wrapped in that ridiculous fishing hat. There was a small bronze plaque by the roots. Craig once joked it was tacky. I sat on the bench we'd built together the year after Wyatt was born. Back when I thought family was something you built and held, not something that tolerated you. Frank, I whispered, I think it's time. No wind, no signs, just the usual silence, but it felt like agreement. Inside, I spent the rest of the day going through my records. My drawers were always neat, a habit drilled into me by a childhood in a house where nothing was predictable but what you could account for. There were receipts, private school payments, dental bills, car insurance for Craig's third vehicle. Lines and lines of expenses, all mine, none reimbursed. I found a post-it note Tammy had scribbled months ago. Ask Marilyn to cover staging for 11th Ave. No please, no signature. Just an instruction, like I was a damn assistant. Brooke arrived just after 5. She always came on Thursdays, said the traffic was better. I knew she came then, because that's when Tammy and Craig were least likely to be home. She brought me a tiny bouquet of sunflowers this time. They looked like they needed a home, she said. We sat in the sunroom. I made tea, even though it was too warm for it. Are you okay? She asked, halfway through her cup. You seem, I don't know, quieter. I looked at her. She had my eyes. Her mother, Craig's ex-wife, had left years ago, and Brooke had grown up between houses, neither of which had much space for her. Maybe that's why we understood each other. They said I needed to contribute, I said. Brooke blinked. You? Contribute? I nodded. But you pay for everything. I gave her a look. Oh, she said. They mean something else. They mean they want a reason to push me out, I said quietly. But I've got one last thing to contribute. And I think it's going to count. Brooke didn't ask questions. She just reached over and took my hand. I'm with you, Grandma, she said, whatever it is. After she left, I locked the black folder in my room and placed my lawyer's card on top. Tomorrow, I'd take the next step. Not because I was angry, but because I was done being erased by the people I loved most. Frank and I bought the house in the spring of 1986. It cost $97,000, and every cent felt like a mountain. We'd just had Craig. He was 3 months old and colicky, and we were both too exhausted to think clearly. But when I saw the wraparound porch and the oak tree in the backyard, I told Frank, "This is it." And he agreed without a word, just nodded and squeezed my hand. He always let me have the last word on anything that really mattered. Not because he didn't care, but because he trusted me. That was our rhythm. We both worked back then. Frank at the shipyard, me as a receptionist in a dental clinic. We pinched pennies. I made curtains out of old tablecloths. He fixed the plumbing himself with library books and trial and error. We grew into that house like a pair of well-worn slippers. Then came the cancer. It started in his stomach and spread like spilled ink. Frank was gone before our 40th anniversary. Just like that. I buried half of myself with him and got up the next morning anyway, because there was no one else who would. Craig was in his 30s by then, married to someone loud and blonde and quick with complaints. I'd never said a bad word about her, still haven't. But I always saw how tired she made him. Brooke came along not long after, a bright spot in all that noise. When the divorce happened, I told Craig he could come home. Just for a while. He didn't. Not then. It wasn't until his second job loss, right after Tammy, that he came knocking. Said it was just until I get back on my feet. I welcomed him. I always did. Always will, I suppose, in some corner of me. But the house changed when Tammy moved in. She called it ours within a week. Rearranged the living room. Put my good china in storage because it looked dated. I said nothing. I thought, foolishly, that love meant staying silent when things weren't quite right. When Wyatt was born, I paid for the hospital deposit, the crib, the night nanny. No one asked me to. They just assumed. And I let them. I paid the taxes when Craig couldn't. The heating when it failed one January. Tammy's online certification course in luxury real estate. And then her second one when she said the first wasn't serious enough. I even paid for Craig's therapist after he said he felt disrespected at home. The irony of it nearly made me laugh. And all that time, I believed that giving was the same as being loved. I see now that I confused gratitude with dependence, that their comfort didn't mean my inclusion, that being the foundation doesn't mean anyone looks down to see what's holding them up. In 2018, Craig came to me with papers. "Just in case something happens to you," he said. "This makes things easier. For bills, decisions." It was a power of attorney. I signed it without reading all of it. I trusted him. He was my son. This morning, I found that document. I read it this time. Every word. And then I made 2 phone calls. One to my lawyer, the other to the bank. I cancelled every automatic payment linked to my account. Staging fees, insurance policies, utilities. Even the Netflix family plan Tammy had me just put on my card 2 years ago. Then I called a locksmith. "I want all new locks installed," I told him. "Doors, garage, everything." He hesitated. "Anyone you don't want getting back in?" "Just anyone who no longer lives here," I said. I stood by the window and watched the street, waiting for their car to pull up. I didn't feel guilt, just a strange calm, like finally waking up from a dream you didn't know you were having. I wasn't throwing them out. Not yet. But I was about to remind them whose name was on the deed. Tammy came home first. I heard her heels on the front walk. Sharp, fast, impatient. She always walked like she was in charge of something, or someone. I stayed in the kitchen, folding towels at the counter. Old habits. The kind you keep even when your hands aren't as steady as they used to be. The front door opened. A pause. Then a slam. "Marilyn?" she called. "Why is my key not working?" I kept folding. She appeared a moment later in the doorway, holding her purse like it was a shield. "Did you change the locks?" I looked up, calm as ever. I did. Her mouth opened, then closed. She wasn't used to being answered directly. She was used to sighs and silence. "You can't do that," she said, voice rising. "I can, and I did." Her cheeks flushed. "Craig's going to lose it." "I imagine he might." Tammy stared at me like I was something inconvenient, a bill she didn't want to pay. "What is this about? Some sort of punishment?" "No," I said. "It's about clarity." I moved past her, slow and sure, and poured myself a glass of water. My hand didn't even shake. "Your belongings are still here," I added. "In the guest room. You're welcome to collect them." "You're serious." I took a sip of water. "Very." She let out a short, nervous laugh. "You've lost it. Honestly, Marilyn, this is insane. You can't just evict your own family." I met her eyes. "Do you think it's still your house?" She blinked. "What?" "You speak as if you own it, as if I'm a tenant overstaying my welcome. But the deed is in my name. It always has been. Not yours, not Craig's. That's not how family works." "No," I said. "It's how ownership works. And family. Family doesn't ask you to prove your worth in a house you built from the ground up. She stood there a moment, stunned, then pulled out her phone. I'm calling Craig. I assumed you would. Tammy stormed out of the kitchen, heels striking the floor like a warning. I heard her voice in the foyer, sharp and fast, followed by a door slam. I stayed at the counter, finished folding the towels. My hands were steady now, remarkably steady. An hour later, Craig pulled into the driveway. I saw him from the window. He didn't rush. He never did. Craig had always been a man who thought presence alone could fix anything. He came through the back door, the one I'd left unlocked on purpose. I wasn't cruel. I just wanted control. "Mum?" he said, walking in like nothing had changed. "What's going on?" I set the towels down. "Why is Tammy saying you locked her out?" "Because I changed the locks." He stared. "You what?" "I've revoked your access, Craig, to the house, to the accounts, to everything." He gave a soft, mocking laugh. "Come on, let's not be dramatic." I folded my arms. "Do you remember what you said to me 2 days ago?" He blinked. "About proving I could still contribute." Craig looked down. "I have," I said. "I contributed one last gift. Control. Over what's mine. Over what I built." His jaw clenched. "This is absurd." "No. This is overdue." "I can't believe you'd do this." I stepped closer. "I can't believe I waited this long." He opened his mouth, closed it, looked around like he might see the house itself disagreeing with me. But the walls were silent. And for once, so was I. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not from nerves, that ship had sailed, but from the simple exhaustion of finally drawing a line where there'd never been one before. The house was quiet. No slamming cabinets, no muted arguments through thin guest room walls, just the soft ticking of the kitchen clock and the occasional creak of old floorboards adjusting themselves like an exhale. By morning, I'd already dressed and made coffee when Brooke arrived. I hadn't called her. She just knew. That's how it was with us. She walked in through the back door, holding a bag of muffins and a look of concern. "Grandma," she said, eyes scanning my face. "They're saying you've gone off the deep end." I smiled faintly. "I'm afraid I'm just getting started." She sat at the table, set down the bag, and reached for my hand without asking. "They've been calling me non-stop," she said. "Craig, Tammy, even Wyatt." I nodded. "And what did they say?" "That you locked them out, changed all the payments, and that you're being manipulated?" I raised an eyebrow. "By whom, exactly?" "Me," she said quietly. "They think I've talked you into this?" I let out a soft breath. I wish someone had. Brooke looked down at the table, chewing her lip. "I told them the truth. That I found out when it happened. That I support you." I squeezed her hand. "That's enough, sweetheart. That's more than enough." We sat in silence a while. I drank my coffee. She picked at a blueberry muffin. Then she asked, "What's the plan now?" I got up and walked to the drawer under the microwave. The one where I kept things I didn't want to deal with. Flyers, expired coupons, letters I never mailed. I pulled out a manila folder and brought it back to the table. Inside, the latest bank statements, legal documents, a printed copy of the deed, and the updated draft of my will, marked in pen. Brooke opened it carefully. Her eyes scanned the pages. "You're transferring the trust?" I nodded. "To you." She looked up, startled. "Grandma, I already talked to the attorney. It won't make you rich overnight, don't worry. It just means the house and what's left of my savings won't fall back into the wrong hands the moment I die." She shook her head. "That's not why I'm—" "I know." I touched her cheek gently. That's why it's you. Brooke swallowed hard. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves scraped across the porch like restless whispers. Tammy said she's going to fight it, Brooke said softly. That you're not thinking clearly. That they can prove it in court. I hope they try, I said. It'll be the first time they've shown up to anything on time in years. Brooke gave a sad little laugh. Then she leaned in and said, They won't win. I know. But it might get ugly. It already was, I said. This is just the part where I stop pretending otherwise. That afternoon, I called my attorney again. We set a date to sign the final documents. Then I called the utility companies one by one, making sure nothing, not a single watt or drop of water, was tied to Craig's name. When I reached the last bill, I asked the woman on the phone to confirm. The primary account holder is Marilyn Bishop, correct? Yes, ma'am, she said. You're the only one authorized. I smiled. Good. Then I took out my address book, the paper one, with corners curling from years of use, and flipped to B. I found the number for Henry Walters, the property attorney Frank and I had used once, long ago, and I dialed. Mr. Walters? I said when he picked up. This is Marilyn Bishop. I need to file a formal eviction notice. There was a pause. Then he said, Just give me the names. It wasn't revenge. I need that to be understood. I didn't sit in that kitchen, dialing my lawyer, imagining their faces when they'd get the notice. I didn't relish it. I didn't smile. I just sat very still, with the weight of 78 years in my chest and the quiet certainty of a woman who'd finally learned where her line was drawn. Mr. Walters didn't ask unnecessary questions. He'd always been the quiet type, brisk, respectful. Frank had liked that about him. So did I. I'll need their full names, dates of birth if possible, and the duration of occupancy, he said. Craig Bishop, I said. Born March 12th, 1975. Tammy Bishop. I don't know her maiden name anymore, but she took Craig's. And Wyatt Bishop, born October something, 2006. They've lived here since August 2017. There was a pause. That's a long time. It was meant to be short. I'll prepare the 30-day notice, he said. We can file it with the clerk's office first thing tomorrow. If they don't vacate voluntarily, we'll proceed through formal channels. I expect they won't, I said. He sighed. People rarely do, not when they've grown comfortable. That word sat with me. Comfortable. I'd paid for their comfort. With my money, yes, but more than that. With my silence, my space, my patience. I had been the insulation around their lives, keeping things warm, soft, protected. And now I was removing it. After the call, I sat down with a yellow legal pad and made a list. I've always believed in lists. They make things concrete. To do before the notice is served. Secure valuables. Speak to Brooke about temporary arrangements. Reconfirm bank account freezes. Contact local locksmith again. Garage code needs resetting. Call doctor. Reschedule appointment for quieter week. Not one item on that list mentioned anger. I wasn't angry. I was done. That night, Craig knocked on my bedroom door. I didn't answer right away. I let him stand there long enough to feel the shift. Then I opened it. He looked tired, not broken, just inconvenienced. That was always Craig's threshold, not injustice, not cruelty, just whether his routine had been disrupted. "Mum," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "This is getting out of hand." I leaned on the doorframe. "Is it? You locked us out. You shut off the payments. Tammy's losing her mind. Wyatt's sleeping at a friend's. You can't just—" I can, I said. I did. He looked at me like I'd spoken another language. This is our home, too. No, I said calmly. It's mine. You were guests, long-term ones, and like any guest, your welcome had limits. Craig's face changed then. Something in it fell. Not guilt. I'd seen enough of him to know what guilt looked like. No, it was fear. Fear of not knowing what came next. We can't just find a place overnight, he said. The market's a mess. Tammy needs her office. Wyatt's still in school. We have roots here. So did I said. But you pulled them up long ago. He looked like he might say something more, but he didn't. He just stood there, fidgeting, then said, "We'll talk about this tomorrow." "No," I said, and stepped back inside. "Tomorrow you'll receive the notice. There won't be anything left to discuss." And then I closed the door. I leaned against it afterward, not shaking, not crying, just breathing, steady, quiet, certain. The way I wished I'd learned to breathe years ago. The courthouse was quiet that morning. Too early for the rush of small claims and traffic disputes, too late for the noise of morning commuters. I liked it that way. The marble floors echoed with my steps, and for the first time in a long while, that echo didn't sound like loneliness. It sounded like arrival. Henry Walters met me at the clerk's window. He wore the same beige trench coat he always had, even in July, and handed me a stack of documents without fanfare. "Just your signature here," he said, turning the top page toward me. "This formally serves the 30-day notice to vacate. Once filed, we notify the occupants. From that point, the clock starts." I took the pen he offered. My hands didn't tremble. I signed. "That's it?" I asked. "That's it," he confirmed. "They'll receive it by courier tomorrow, certified and time-stamped." I nodded. Henry tucked the documents back into his leather folder. "If they contest, we'll proceed to a hearing. But given the ownership history and the fact that they have no lease agreement, it's very straightforward." "Straightforward," I repeated. "Imagine that." We stepped out into the bright air. Charleston in summer was always a mix of heat and jasmine, heavy and sweet. As we stood on the courthouse steps, Henry adjusted his glasses and asked, not unkindly, "How are you holding up, Marilyn?" I looked out across the square, at the brick buildings, the crepe myrtles blooming hard against the sun. "I'm tired," I said. But not in the usual way. Not in the way where you lie down and hope it passes. This is cleaner, lighter. He nodded, not pressing. Henry was good at silence. I went straight to the bank after that. Just a formality, but I wanted to see it done. The clerk, a young man with pink cheeks and a practiced smile, pulled up my account. "Yes, Mrs. Bishop, we have everything here. All automatic payments cancelled. Power of attorney revoked. And the trust?" "Still in process," I said. "But we're close." He typed a few things, then turned the monitor slightly toward me. "Would you like to set notifications for any new attempts to access the account?" "Yes," I said. "All of them." I left the bank at noon and walked to the cafe 2 blocks over. It was one of the few places I still liked downtown. Quiet, clean, with real china cups. Frank and I used to come here on Sundays. I ordered the same thing I always had, Earl Grey and a cranberry scone. When I got home, the house was empty. Craig was likely at some friend's office pretending to look for work. Tammy would be out selling homes I'd never step foot in. Wyatt. Who knew? I stood in the foyer, letting the quiet settle. Then I walked to the living room, where Tammy had moved in her sleek white desk and ring light, and began boxing it all up, piece by piece. The lamp, the glossy folders, the framed diploma, the coffee mug that read, "Boss Babe." I stacked the boxes in the garage. Tomorrow, I'd label them. By evening, I was sore. My knees ached, and my fingers had that familiar tightness. But I didn't stop. I cleared the laundry room where they'd stored all their overflow. I gathered every bill they'd left in my name and shredded each one. By the time Brooke arrived just before dusk, I was halfway through the hallway closet. She stood in the doorway, eyes wide. "You're spring cleaning?" I smiled. "I suppose you could call it that." She stepped inside, took in the stacks of boxes, the empty spaces where Tammy's decor used to hang. "I signed it," I told her. "The eviction notice." Brooke blinked. "You really did it?" "Yes." "And now?" "Now," I said, dusting off my hands. "We wait." She crossed the room slowly, took my arm and sat beside me on the sofa. "Do you feel okay?" "I feel," I said, after a pause, "like I've finally stopped trying to earn a place in my own home." Brooke looked at me for a long time. Then she said quietly, "I'm proud of you." I patted her hand. "So am I." And then we just sat there. Two women, two generations, watching the sun slide low through the blinds. The house felt different somehow. Less like something under siege, more like something returned. Mine. At last. The official envelope arrived the next morning, crisp, white, and stamped with the courthouse seal. I didn't have to open it. I knew exactly what it said. But I laid it on the kitchen table anyway, front and center, where Craig would see it the moment he walked in. I made coffee the way I always did, strong, with a splash of milk. I even buttered some toast. If he wanted a scene, I'd give him normal. That always unnerved him more. He came home around 10:15. I heard the car door slam, the key in the lock, a key that no longer worked. He banged twice, then shouted from the porch, "Mum? Seriously?" I let him knock, let the tension build. Then I opened the door slowly, met his eyes, and said, "Mail came." He brushed past me like a gust of hot air and saw the envelope. He didn't sit. He just stood there, reading it, mouth pressed tight. "You actually filed?" "Yes," I said. "Yesterday morning." Craig let out a dry laugh. "This is insane. You're going to court to kick us out of a house we've lived in for 6 years." "7," I corrected. "And not a dime of rent paid in any of those years." "We're family." I stared at him. "Are we?" That made him pause. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't think you know what family is, Craig. You moved back in when things were hard. I welcomed you. You stayed when things weren't. I tolerated it. Then you decided that I needed to earn my place in the house I bought, paid for, and kept running long after your name was added to the mailbox." "I didn't mean it like that." "You did," I said. "And even if you hadn't said the words, you made it clear every single day, with the way you ignored me. The way Tammy took over this place like it was hers. The way Wyatt passed me in the hallway like I was a coat rack." Craig's hands were on his hips now, defensive. "You think this won't destroy everything? That we'll forgive you after this?" I looked down at the table, then up at him again. "Craig, I'm not asking to be forgiven. I'm asking to be left alone." There was a long silence. Then his voice softened. "Mum, this isn't you." I smiled, just slightly. "You haven't really known me in years. This is me. You just forgot." He looked like he might say more, like he might reach for some last weapon, some forgotten shard of guilt to throw my way. But just then, Brooke walked in. She saw him, paused, then looked at me. "Everything okay?" Craig turned on her. "Did you put her up to this?" Brooke's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me?" "She's not like this. She wouldn't have done any of this on her own. My granddaughter crossed her arms. Maybe she finally did. Craig laughed, but it came out flat. You think this is going to solve anything? You think when she's gone, you'll be the one in charge? Brooke didn't flinch. I don't want to be in charge. I just want her to be respected. That's rich coming from someone who only visits when it's convenient. Brooke took a step forward. I'm here because I love her, not because I need her credit card. The room was very still. Craig turned to me. So that's it? You're throwing your son out? Your grandson? I'm removing tenants, I said, not family. That part's already been done. By you. He stared at me. Then he picked up the envelope, shoved it into his pocket, and walked out without another word. The door slammed. Brooke stood there, breathing hard. Sorry, she said. I didn't mean to. I reached out and took her hand. You are perfect. She sat down next to me, still shaking a little. He won't let it go. I know. He's going to try something. Probably. I poured her some coffee. But we'll handle it. Together. She smiled weakly, and for the first time since this all began, I saw something that had been missing in her face too. Relief. For both of us, I think. The kind that only comes when you finally stop swallowing what you were never meant to stomach. The next day brought silence. No phone calls, no texts, no knocks on the door. Not even the sound of Craig's car engine sputtering up the driveway. It was the kind of silence I'd once feared. The silence of being discarded, ignored. But today it felt different. Not emptiness, but space. Breathing room. A clearing. Brooke came by in the afternoon with groceries, even though I hadn't asked. You're not running out of anything on my watch, she said with a smile, unloading bags onto the counter. Apples, bread, almond milk, her favourite lavender dish soap. I wondered, not for the first time, how someone like Craig could have raised someone like her. We had tea and sat in the sunroom, watching a pair of squirrels bicker over a spot on the fence. It was the first moment in weeks I'd felt like a woman again, not a strategy. Then the doorbell rang. I didn't move right away. Neither did Brooke. I stood slowly and walked to the door. No one I knew ever used the bell. Only people who wanted something. Through the glass, I saw a man in a navy blazer holding a large white envelope. Mrs. Bishop? He asked as I opened the door. Yes. You've been served. He handed it over and left without another word. I closed the door and returned to the kitchen. Brooke watched me open the envelope. Inside, a petition. Legalese dressed as concern. Craig and Tammy had filed for emergency guardianship. Claiming you're mentally unfit, Brooke said as she read over my shoulder. That you've been manipulated, that you're putting yourself at risk. I said nothing, just folded the papers neatly and set them beside the salt shaker. Can they win? She asked. Not unless the court believes them. But they'll try everything. I nodded. Of course they will. They're not used to hearing no. We sat in silence for a while. I can talk to the judge, Brooke offered. Write a letter. I know it's not much, but... No, I said gently. If it comes to court, I'll speak for myself. I want them, and the court, to see exactly who they're underestimating. Brooke looked at me, eyes wide with something between admiration and sorrow. I don't want you to go through this alone. I won't, I said. You're here. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm, warm, steady. That night, I pulled out a pen and paper and wrote down every detail. Dates, conversations, payments, Craig's message about me needing to prove myself. I made a list of witnesses, including the bank manager and my attorney. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to lay bare every inch of truth they had chosen to overlook. I wasn't scared. I was ready. Let them bring their papers. Let them parade their concern in court. I'd show up in my best dress, sit down straight-backed before the judge, and tell the story they didn't expect to be told out loud. Because if they wanted a battle, they should have remembered. I've been fighting all my life. This time, I just wasn't fighting for them. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. Family court, room 204. I arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a navy blue suit I hadn't touched since Frank's funeral. It still fit, though it hung a little looser now. Age had a way of softening the body while hardening the spine. Brooke was already there, sitting in the hallway with a thermos of tea and a face full of worry. She stood as soon as she saw me. "You look formidable," she whispered. "Good," I said. "Let's keep it that way." Craig and Tammy arrived 2 minutes before the start. He wore a grey blazer that still had the price tag tucked in the collar. Tammy was in all beige, blazer, heels, handbag, like a real estate brochure had come to life. Neither of them looked at me. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wooden benches, a quiet hum of air conditioning. The judge, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and perfect posture, entered and called the case. "Petition for emergency guardianship of Marilyn Bishop," she read. "Filed by Craig and Tamara Bishop. All parties present?" "Present," Craig said. "Present," I echoed. The judge looked at me directly. "Mrs. Bishop, I understand your son has filed this petition out of concern for your well-being. He alleges erratic behavior, financial mismanagement, and possible undue influence by a third party. Do you have legal counsel?" "I do not," I said. "I'll represent myself." A pause. She nodded. "Very well. Mr. Bishop, you may proceed." Craig stood. His voice was smooth, too smooth. The way he spoke at PTA meetings when he was still pretending to care. "Your Honor," he began, "this has been a difficult few weeks. We've noticed a pattern of behavior in my mother that suggests confusion, impulsiveness, even paranoia. She's made sudden changes to her financial affairs, including revoking long-standing arrangements without explanation. She's changed the locks to her home. She's issued an eviction notice against her own family. We're concerned she's not acting in her own best interest." "And who do you believe is influencing her?" the judge asked. Craig hesitated. "My daughter, Brooke." Brooke sat up straighter but didn't speak. "She's very close with my mother," Craig continued. "Perhaps too close. She stands to benefit from recent changes in the estate. We believe—" "That's enough," the judge said, raising a hand. "Let's not speculate about motives." She turned to me. "Mrs. Bishop, would you like to respond?" I stood, smoothed my skirt, and stepped forward. "I'm 78 years old," I began. "I've lived in the same house for 37 of those years. I paid for it with my husband, God rest him. I paid every bill, every tax. I opened my door to my son and his family when they needed help. I supported them financially, emotionally, and practically for over 6 years." I paused. The room was quiet. "And 2 weeks ago, my son told me I needed to prove I was still contributing, that I had to justify living in the house I bought. He and his wife controlled the space, the bills, the atmosphere, while I was reduced to a silent presence in the guest room." I took a breath. I didn't act out of confusion. I acted out of clarity, for the first time in a long time. I revoked access to my accounts. I changed the locks. I filed a legal eviction, not out of spite, but to reclaim my home and my dignity. If that's paranoia, then perhaps more of us should be afflicted. The judge raised her eyebrows, but didn't interrupt. I have documents, I continued, pulling a folder from my bag. Bank statements, proof of payments I made on behalf of my son's family, the power of attorney I signed under pressure, and the letter my son wrote me, the one that started all this. I handed it all to the clerk. The judge flipped through the pages in silence. Craig fidgeted. Tammy stared ahead, face unreadable. Mrs. Bishop, the judge said after a moment, do you feel safe living alone? I do now. She looked at Brooke. And you, Miss Bishop? Do you have any financial control over your grandmother's accounts? No, Brooke said clearly. Nor do I want it. The judge sat back. This is not an emergency situation, she said firmly. There is no evidence of mental incompetence or financial exploitation. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied. Craig exhaled like he'd been punched. The judge looked at him. If you wish to pursue long-term guardianship, you may refile, but I advise you to consider whether this is truly in your mother's best interest or merely your own. With that, she stood. We're adjourned. I gathered my papers and walked out of the courtroom with Brooke at my side. We didn't speak until we reached the street. Are you okay? She asked. I looked up at the sun breaking through the clouds. I'm not okay, I said. I'm free. We didn't speak for 3 days. Not a word from Craig, not a message, not a knock, not a note slipped under the door. I knew better than to mistake the silence for surrender. My son wasn't the type to disappear without a strategy, only to disappear while crafting one. But for those 3 days, I let myself rest. I opened the windows wide in the mornings and let the house breathe again. I pulled back the curtains Tammy insisted on keeping closed, for privacy, and dusted every surface with something that felt like reverence. The light hit the living room in a way I hadn't seen in years, the kind of warm, golden stripe that made you feel like you hadn't missed your life just yet. On the second day, I found my wedding album tucked behind a row of cookbooks. Frank and I on the courthouse steps, grinning like two fools who thought love would be enough for everything. It had been enough, actually, right up until it wasn't. But what we built still stood, and I was standing with it. By the third day, I began boxing up more of their things. Tammy's skincare fridge in the upstairs bathroom, Wyatt's forgotten guitar and the amp he never used, Craig's stack of golf magazines, more aspirational than practical. Each item was wrapped, labelled, and set by the garage door. I was folding the last of Tammy's monogrammed towels when the front door flew open. She didn't knock. Of course not. Tammy strode in with a face full of panic, dressed up as outrage. She looked around, as if expecting someone to leap out from the shadows and shout, "Just kidding." "Where is Craig?" I asked calmly, not bothering to put down the towel. "Out handling the fallout you've created," she snapped. "Do you even understand what you've done? You embarrassed us in court. You've made us a joke." "No," I said. "I told the truth. If that's a joke, I suppose the punchline was overdue." She blinked, taken off guard by my tone. It happened more often now. "This isn't just about us," she continued, stepping closer. "It's about Wyatt. He's still a minor. He needs stability." I set the towel aside. Wyatt is 16, and the only stability he's known lately is learning how to treat people who love him as if they're furniture. "You think this is easy for us?" she snapped. "Do you think we wanted to come live here? You act like we conned our way in." "You didn't have to," I said. "You just stopped pretending you'd leave." She crossed her arms. "So what, Marilyn? You just want to die in this house alone? No, I said. I want to live in it with peace. And maybe one day, with someone who knocks before they walk through my door. Tammy's mouth twisted. You're making a huge mistake. Craig is furious. You think this is the end of it? No, I said. I think this is the beginning. She stared at me for a long moment. Then her eyes darted to the stack of boxes. You packed our things? I packed what's mine and what isn't. You can't be serious. 30 days, I reminded her. You've had 6 of them already. Tammy's voice cracked then, just for a second. We have nowhere to go. I paused. For a moment, I felt the pull, the old reflex to soften, to reach, to fix. But I'd done enough fixing in my life. It was time they learned how to repair something without borrowing my tools. There are rentals, I said quietly. Apartments, basements, hotels. The same places people go when they need to figure it out. You're heartless. No, I said. I'm finished. Tammy stood frozen for a moment, her breathing sharp, shoulders rising and falling. Then she turned, stormed out, and slammed the door behind her so hard the frame shivered. I stood there, staring at it. And for the first time since Frank died, I whispered into the silence, She's not coming back. And neither, I knew, was the woman I used to be, the one who let herself disappear just to keep the peace. They came as a pair, 3 days later, not with apologies, not with boxes, but with a clipboard and a thin-lipped real estate agent named Phil. Craig stood behind him, like a boy hiding behind a substitute teacher. Tammy was already inside before I could close the screen door. We're just here to do a walkthrough, she announced, without so much as a glance in my direction. Phil's going to take a look and let us know what kind of listing price we're working with. I blinked. Listing? For the house, Craig added, voice clipped. We've decided to sell. The absurdity of it hit me so suddenly I almost laughed. You've decided? Tammy gave a practiced sigh. This has gone far enough, Marilyn. You want to make a statement? Fine. You've made it. But we all know how this ends. Phil, the agent, glanced around the hallway like he'd walked into a crime scene. You mentioned you were the sole owner? He asked Craig, tentatively. No, I said. He isn't. Phil looked at me, confused. I'm sorry. Who has title? I do, I said, stepping forward. My name. Alone. It's never changed. Phil froze. I think, I added, turning to Craig, you may have misunderstood the terms of your occupancy. Craig's face darkened. This is still my childhood home. No, I said. It's your mother's home. And you were welcome here until you weren't. Tammy's jaw tensed. You can't seriously be thinking of keeping us out forever. This house is a resource, Marilyn. You're sitting on equity while your family struggles. I looked her in the eye. Then perhaps your family should struggle a little louder. I can't hear them over the sound of their entitlement. Phil, sensing that the air had turned toxic, stepped back. Perhaps I'll come back another time, he mumbled. You won't, I said. There will be no listing. Craig stepped forward, his voice lower now. We don't have anywhere to go. I crossed my arms. That was true the day you moved in. You didn't seem very concerned then. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked to Tammy, who was already scrolling on her phone like she was above all this. Where's Wyatt? I asked suddenly. Or didn't you bring him to witness this attempt at a takeover? Tammy didn't look up. He's staying with friends. He doesn't need to see you like this. Like what? I said quietly. Firm? Clear? Unbending? Good. Let him remember it. Craig looked around the house, the photos still on the wall, the worn chair by the window, the kitchen he hadn't cleaned in 6 years, and I saw something shift in him, not regret, but calculation. "This isn't over," he said finally. "It is for me," I replied. They left shortly after, Phil muttering apologies all the way down the walk. The door closed behind them with the quietest sound. No slamming, no yelling, just finality. I went to the garage and took a black marker from the toolbox. On each of the boxes, Craig's, Tammy's, Wyatt's, I wrote, "Ready for pickup. Do not return inside." And then I went back inside, poured myself a glass of water, and sat in the one chair no one had ever tried to take from me. The eviction notice had been served. The hearing had been won. The real estate agent had fled. And all that was left now was the final countdown of the days. 18 by my calendar. 18 more sunrises in which I would open my eyes in my own home, breathe my own air, and wait for the sound of absence. The sweetest sound I could imagine. They left on a Tuesday. No dramatic exit, no last-minute appeals, no suitcases dragging down the steps in the middle of the night. Just a white SUV in the driveway at 7:42 a.m., doors slamming with quiet efficiency, and then gone. I watched from the kitchen window. I didn't need to stand at attention. I just stood the way you do when a storm finally lifts. Still, patient, a little tired. The garage was empty by noon. I opened the door slowly, like it might still hold the tension of them. But there was nothing left, except dust lines where their boxes had stood, and a single cracked travel mug with the word hustle fading on the side. I threw it out. The house was mine again. But it wasn't immediate, that feeling. It wasn't like flipping a switch. The quiet came first, the full, strange quiet of absence. No Wyatt clomping down the stairs, no Tammy's phone on speaker, no Craig pacing the hallway like his restlessness was someone else's fault. Just me. The air moved different. It had space now. The rugs stayed where I'd straightened them. The kitchen table didn't shift an inch. The thermostat stayed at 72. I started unlocking drawers I hadn't opened in years, my old sewing kit, the stack of birthday cards I'd written but never given because no one wanted handwritten things anymore. A photograph of Frank I hadn't seen in a decade. Him in the garage, wiping his hands on that same oil-stained cloth he refused to throw away. I placed it on the mantel. In the afternoon, I stood on the back porch and listened. The cicadas were starting to hum. The oak tree creaked once, slow and deep, like it was stretching. I'd planted a chair back there again, the same spot Frank used to sit. I didn't cry. I just sat. At dusk, Brooke arrived with a casserole and a bottle of wine. She didn't say anything when I opened the door, just wrapped her arms around me and stood there for a long moment. I let her. "They're gone," she said, finally. "They are. Do you feel better?" I thought about it. I feel clearer. We ate on the porch, knees touching, plates balanced on our laps like we used to when she was a kid. She told me about her exams, her plans to intern at the library downtown. She asked if I needed help with anything. "Just company," I said, "and maybe someone to fix the upstairs sink." She laughed. "You don't want me fixing anything, but I can call someone who can." After dinner, we sat in silence, watching the light shift on the yard. "You know," she said, "you never had to do any of this for me." "I didn't," I replied. "I did it for myself." Brooke nodded slowly. "Still, thank you." I reached over and tucked her hair behind her ear. "Thank you for staying close, even when they tried to pull everything apart." She looked at me with tears she didn't shed. I always knew where the heart of this family was. And for the first time in a long while, I believed someone meant that. After she left, I washed our dishes by hand. The good kind of tired settled into my shoulders, the kind that comes from action, not endurance. I didn't stay up late. I didn't double-check the locks. The house was quiet. Not the kind of quiet you brace against, the kind you earn. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. There was a rhythm to them, simple, steady, mine. I woke up when I wanted to. I made real breakfasts again. Oatmeal with cinnamon, sometimes eggs with toast. Not just toast alone, eaten standing over the sink. I opened the blinds in every room, even the ones I used to avoid. The sunlight came in like a guest finally invited back. I started a new notebook. Nothing fancy. Just a spiral-bound one I'd bought years ago and never used. I wrote down everything I wanted to remember, where I'd hidden the spare keys, which drawer held the bank records, the name of the plumber who didn't talk down to me. Not because I was afraid of forgetting, but because I was finally allowed to plan for myself. One afternoon, I cleaned out the medicine cabinet. There were 3 nearly empty bottles of anti-anxiety pills, Craig's, from that rough stretch 2 years ago. I'd kept refilling the prescription because he asked, even when he wasn't taking them. Said it made him feel covered. He never noticed when I stopped paying for it. I threw them out. The court had ruled. The 30 days were over, and still no call. Not from Craig, not from Tammy, not even from Wyatt. And I didn't chase it. I didn't need them to see what they'd done. I only needed to stop allowing it. I planted herbs in the windowsill again. Basil, thyme, mint. The simple kind of life I'd once put aside for more important things. Funny how much more important those small things feel when no one's telling you they're frivolous. On Sunday, Brooke came by with a box of old VHS tapes. "I found these in Dad's closet," she said. "They were just sitting there. Thought you might want them." I opened the lid. Birthday parties, school plays, one labelled Thanksgiving 1998. I smiled. That was the year Frank dropped the entire turkey and tried to serve it anyway. We all pretended not to notice the dent from the floor. We spent the afternoon watching them on the dusty old player I hadn't thrown away. The picture was grainy. The sound warbled. But there we were. A version of us I hadn't seen in decades. Me in a red apron. Craig, still awkward but eager. Brooke, just a toddler clapping along to some song no one remembered the words to. Brooke squeezed my hand. "You were the only one holding it all together." "I was the only one who never left," I said softly. When she went home that evening, I didn't feel lonely. I felt rooted. After she left, I lit a candle and sat on the porch with a blanket over my legs. The oak tree rustled like it had something to say. I listened. I think it said, "You're still here." And I whispered back, "Yes, I am." I sat at the kitchen table this morning with my coffee. Strong, dark, no sugar. The way Frank used to drink it. The way I never liked it, but made it anyway. And I realized, somewhere between the first and second sip, that I no longer wait for footsteps in the hallway. I don't brace for voices raised in another room. I don't flinch at the sound of a phone vibrating across the counter. There is peace in this house now. Not silence, not emptiness, but peace. That kind that comes after weathering something long and mean. Craig hasn't called. Tammy hasn't written. Wyatt sent a message through Brooke once, asking if he could pick up a box of clothes. I left it on the porch. He took it and said nothing. I didn't expect more. The truth is, I stopped waiting for them to acknowledge me the day I realized they only saw what they could use. And that's not bitterness speaking. That's clarity. A hard-won kind. Brooke still comes every Thursday. Sometimes she brings dinner, sometimes just herself. We talk about books, her job, her future. We talk like women who've both seen how small love can get when people forget to feed it, and how strong it can grow when someone finally does. The eviction notice came and went. The court ruled in my favor. The locks stayed changed. The house held firm. And so did I. I changed my will. I donated to the library downtown, enough to keep their small literacy program going another year. I sent a handwritten letter to the local high school offering to sponsor a girl's scholarship in Frank's name. I even had my name removed from one of Craig's old credit accounts. Quietly, finally. None of it was loud, none of it vengeful. It was contribution, the kind they never understood. Yesterday I found an old scarf in the hallway closet. It still smelled like the perfume I wore in my 40s. I wrapped it around my shoulders and looked in the mirror. My face is older now, lined, softened, wiser. But I liked what I saw. Because that woman finally stands where she belongs, not just in her home, but in her life. So if you're reading this, and something in you felt seen or known, or maybe just not so alone, don't just scroll away. Stay a moment, leave a comment, share your story. Tell someone what you finally said no to. Because sometimes the quietest voice, the one that says enough, is the one that finally sets you free.